All right, Section 3, The Age of Jackson. This is Chapter 7, Section 3. Main idea, Andrew Jackson's policy spoke for the common people but violated Native American rights. And why does this matter now? The effects of land losses and persecution faced by the Native Americans in the 1800s continue to be reflected in their legal struggle today. Okay, expanding democracy changes politics. Okay, so when John Adams died, his son, John Quincy Adams, was in the second year of his single term as president. He had succeeded James Monroe as president, but was not effective as the nation's chief executive. The principal reason was Andrew Jackson, his chief political opponent. In the election of 1824, Andrew Jackson won the popular vote but lacked the majority vote of the electoral votes, and the House of Representatives had to decide the outcome since no candidate had received a majority of the votes of the Electoral College. So here's a map of what I'm talking about, the election of 1824. You can see that John Adams had 84 electoral votes, and Andrew Jackson had 99. Because of his power in the House, Henry Clay could swing the election either way. Clay disliked Jackson personally and mistrusted his lack of political experience. "I cannot believe," Clay commented, "that killing 2,500 Englishmen at New Orleans qualifies him for the various and difficult task of completing duties of the presidency." Adams, on the other hand, agreed with Clay's American system, and in the end, Adams was elected president by a majority of the states represented in the House. So John Quincy Adams becomes the sixth president, and he's going to be John Adams. That's his son. Jacksonians, or followers of Jackson, accused Adams of stealing the presidency. And when Adams appointed Clay Secretary of State, the Jacksonians claimed that Adams struck a corrupt bargain, and the Jacksonians left the Democratic Party to form. The Jacksonians left the Republican Party to form the Democratic Republican Party, and these are going to be the forerunners of the Democratic Party today. And they did whatever they could to sabotage Adams' policies. All right, so here's John Quincy Adams. He was the sixth president. Andrew Jackson does become president after him. He's going to become the seventh president. All right, democracy and citizenship. During Adams' presidency, most states eased the voting requirements, thereby enlarging the voting population. Fewer states now had property qualifications for voting. In the presidential election of 1824, approximately 350,000 white males voted. And in 1828, over 3 times that number voted. And their votes helped Andrew Jackson. However, certain groups still lacked political power. Free African Americans and women did not enjoy the political freedoms of white males. All right, the election of 1828. Andrew Jackson prepared for the 1828 election after he lost the previous one. Old Hickory showed himself to be a shrewd politician who was well liked by the common man, fighting hard and hard drinking. Those were his slogans. The election of 28 was the dirtiest/meanest election in U.S. history. Jackson won the 1828 election by a landslide. As property restrictions were lifted for voting, more people got to vote. And Rachel Jackson, his wife, actually died of a heart attack from the stress of the campaign. And Jackson never forgave his political enemies. So here's the election of 1828. You can see the blue is Jacksonian Democrats, so Andrew Jackson, and National Republicans, which John Quincy Adams ran under. He completely lost. Jackson's new presidential style. The expansion of voting rights meant that candidates had been able to speak the concerns of the ordinary people. Andrew Jackson had this common touch. So that's going to be a little bit different. I guess before this time, ordinary people did not feel represented by the president. But regional differences grew during Jackson's presidency. Here we go. The North's economy was based on manufacturing and supported tariffs. Now, tariffs are going to be the tax coming from imports from other countries. The South, its economy was based on agriculture, so farming and just working off the land. Opposition to tariffs increased the cost of imported goods, so that would not do well in their favor. And the West was an emerging economy, and it's supported for internal improvements and the sale of public land. So you got three divisions of these are the three divisions. These are the regional differences, basically three divisions of America right now. All right, so the regions of the United States in the early 1800s. Here we go again. The North, its economy was based on manufacturing. The South was based on agriculture, and the West was based on the sale of public land. Jackson's appeal to the common citizen. During the 1828 campaign, Jackson characterized Adams as an intellectual elitist, and by contrast portrayed himself as a man of humble origins, though he was actually a wealthy plantation owner. Jackson won the election by a landslide, and he was so popular that a record numbers of people came to Washington to see Old Hickory inaugurated. If Jackson knew how to inspire loyalty and enthusiasm during a campaign, he also knew how to use his power of the presidency upon gaining office. He announced his appointees. He announced that his appointees to federal jobs would serve as a maximum of 4-year terms. Unless there was a regular turnover of personnel, he declared office holders would become insufficient and corrupt. So Jackson is going to practice the spoil system. And this is, to the victor belongs the spoils to the enemy. Spoils of the enemy. To the victor belong the spoils of the enemy. So in which incoming officials throw out former appointees and replace them with their friends. And he's going to fire nearly 10% of the federal employees that were already working in the White House, and he's going to replace them with his friends. And these guys are going to become advisors of Jackson, and they're going to be dubbed the kitchen cabinet because, these guys were loyalists. They were just his friends. So he's going to make his cabinet the people that advise him, all of his friends, and they're going to be known as the kitchen cabinet because supposedly they slipped into the White House through the kitchen. All right, Andrew Jackson thought of himself as a man of the people. He was the son of a Scots immigration, Scots-Irish immigration, and he had been born in poverty in the Carolinas. And he was the first president since George Washington without a college education. At the time of his election, he was 61. However, Jackson had built a highly successful career. He worked in law, politics, and land speculation, cotton planting, and soldiering. Victory at New Orleans in the War of 1812 made him a hero. But he did live in a mansion in Tennessee, and he owned more than 100 slaves. So he was wealthy. He also survived several duels, which left a bullet lodged in the near his heart, actually. and another one left one of his opponents dead. And these duels were in defense of his beloved wife. So someone was talking trash on his wife, so he said, let's settle this. And they would go back to back and march 10 paces and then turn around and fire. Now, guns back then were probably single shot pistol muskets, so it's kind of like a one shot, one kill type deal. And that's how people settled disputes back then. They shot each other. All right, the removal of Native Americans. Since the 1600s, white settlers had held one of two attitudes toward Native Americans. Some whites favored the displacement and disposition of all Native Americans. Others wished to convert Native Americans to Christianity, turn them into farmers, and absorb them to the white culture. Since the end of the War of 1812, some Southerner tribes, like the Cherokee, the Chickasaw, the Seminole, the Creek, had begun to adopt European culture in their white. They began to adopt the European culture of their white neighbors. These 5 civilized tribes, that's what they were called by the whites, occupied a large area of Georgia and North and South Carolina, Alabama, Mississippi, and Tennessee. Many white planters and miners wanted that land. They wanted them out of there. So here's a map of what exactly I'm talking about. You have Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, and Georgia. A little bit of South Carolina and North Carolina and Tennessee. And they're going to want, so the plantation owners and miners are going to want these tribes out of there and moved into this area, which is going to be Oklahoma. Oh, here's the Seminole, Florida. And here's another map of what I'm talking about. All the tribes that are going to be relocated into this new area, which is going to be Texas and Oklahoma, mostly Oklahoma. Indian Removal Act of 1830. Jackson thought the assimilation could not work. Another possibility, allowing Native Americans to live in their original areas, would have required too many troops to keep that area free of white settlers. Jackson believed that the only solution was to move the Native Americans from their lands further west. Congress passed the Indian Removal Act of 1830. Under this law, the federal government provided funds to negotiate treaties that would force the Native Americans to move west. About 90 treaties were signed. For Jackson, the removal policy was not only liberal but generous. But his arguments were mainly based on the rights of states to govern within their own boundaries. In 1830, Jackson pressured the Chickasaw to sign a treaty that required them to move from Mississippi. And in 1831, he ordered the U.S. troops to forcibly move the Sauk and the Fox from their lands in Illinois and Missouri. And in 1832, he forced the Chickasaw to leave their lands in Alabama, Mississippi. So he was forcibly moving these Native American tribes west. Meanwhile, the Cherokee Nation tried to win treatment through the U.S. legal system. That's a smart idea. Chief Justice John Marshall refused to rule on the first case, and the Cherokee he refused to rule on the first case the Cherokee brought against Georgia, though because in his view, the Cherokee Nation had no federal standing, and it was neither a foreign nation nor a state, but rather a domestic, dependent nation. So that's his Chief Justice Marshall was saying they're not a state, they're not a territory, they're not even a foreign nation. So he claimed it was unconstitutional. That's why he wouldn't hear the case. Undaunted, the Cherokee teamed up with Samuel Austin, and he was a missionary who had been jailed for teaching Indians without a state license. Big deal. The Cherokee knew the court would have to recognize a citizen's right to be heard. So this guy's going to represent him. So he's going to go to court with Georgia in 1832. And the Cherokee Nation finally won recognition as a distant political community. And the court ruled that Georgia was not entitled to regulate the Cherokee nor to invade their lands. And Jackson refused to abide by the Supreme Court decision, saying, John Marshall has made his decision. Now let him enforce it. Cherokee leader John Ross still tried to fight the state in the courts, but the other Cherokee began to promote relocation. In 1835, federal agents declared the majority who favored relocation the true representatives of the Cherokee Nation, and prompted them to sign a treaty of New Echota. Okata? I can't say that word. All right, so they signed a treaty, and the Cherokee are going to move west. This whole situation seems to be pretty unconstitutional. And if maybe you ask me back then, I think maybe Jackson should have been impeached for that. That was a little ridiculous, in my opinion. All right, the treaty gave the last 8 million acres of Cherokee land to the federal government in exchange for approximately $5 million in land west of the Mississippi. And the signing of the treaty marked the beginning of the Cherokee exodus. However, by 1838, nearly 20,000 Cherokee still remained in the East. President Martin Van Buren, Jackson's successor, so he's going to be the 8th president, ordered their forced removal. The U.S. Army troops under the command of General Winfield Scott rounded up the Cherokee and drove them into camps to await the journey. And beginning in October, November of 1838, the Cherokee were sent off in grounds of about 1,000 each on a long journey. And the 800-mile trip was made partially by steamboat, railroad, but mostly on foot. And as the winter came on, more and more of the Cherokee died en route. Along the way, government officials stole Cherokee money while outlaws made off with their livestock. And the Cherokee buried more than a quarter of their people along this trail, which became known as the Trail of Tears. And when they reached their final destination, they ended up on land far inferior to which they had been forced to leave. So they're going to be leaving their southern lands to this western land in Oklahoma, which was pretty much garbage. So here's the Indian territory that they set up. Here's all of them. So Oklahoma is a big Indian territory, or Native American territory. All right, Native Americans continued to struggle for recognition of the land rights. And in 2002, actually, Native American leaders testified during a congressional hearing on the protection of its sacred sites. Many of these sites were threatened by development, population, and vandalism. So they're still fighting for their lands today. Native Americans are. In recent history, I think it was like 2016, 17, I think it was the government wanted to dig a pipeline through one of these Indian reservations, and they were saying, oh, it's unconstitutional. So that's been a recent fight, but I think the government won that one. Other present-day Native Americans have won recognition of their land claims, and over the past 30 years, the federal government has settled property disputes with several tribes in Connecticut, Maine, and other states, and has provided them with funds to purchase ancestral lands. But like I said, the fight still continues today, and they're still fighting for their lands, and the government's still trying to come in there and try to tell them what to do. All right, so that's your lesson for today. That was section 3 of chapter 7. All right, peace.